Um, so today, I think you all know me. I'm Gail D'Onofrio from Yale, but I'm going to also introduce my lead, more than an RA, my like lead project manager for everything in all of my trials is Patty Owens, and she's with us today because she knows more about this even than much more than I do, and has created this very great system with how to do your budgeting process. So I want to make sure she's on because she actually does this and we can practice in the end. And she's also offered to work with any of you individually should you need to create something like I'm going to show you, which is seems very complicated, and it is complicated, but once you do it once and you have that formula, you can just continue to use it as you move along. Now, please feel free to interrupt me anytime. Just shout because it's hard. I'm on a small computer, unfortunately, today. So I don't want to keep going if everybody is confused. All right. Okay. So here we go. All right. So what I'm going to try to show you is from the beginning to the end of doing a just in time and then doing your progress reporting on developing a pretty large grant. And we're going to give you an example of one as we go through. So the first thing is really identify the funding mechanism that you're looking for, the deadlines, the timelines. Make sure that you have all the NIH forms, and I'm sure you have pre-award people who help you with this, but you want to make sure that you have those forms and you understand something about it, because trust me, things can go wrong and they always do at the last minute. So you should have an understanding of this and not just allow it to be someone in some global organization in your institution. And most importantly, and we can share some of those another time, but you have to create these internal checklists so that you know what everybody is doing at one time. And we have examples of that we can send you at some point as well too. And that's not just for the budget, but for every other aspect of your grant, like who's going to do what, who's writing the letters, who's getting this part, who's doing that part, who's doing, all of the um, facilities and all of that stuff. But we're going to talk about today, we're talking about budgeting pretty much exclusively. So you got your checklist, so you know when it's due, and you activate your pre-award person to say, look, I'm ready to go. And then you use this common NIH budget component form, and really your pre-award person is may populate that, or you may populate it. I don't know. It could be different in different institutions. This is what it kind of looks like when you see it. And it has all these different sections on it, which we're going to go through, whether it's your senior and your key personnel, other personnel, equipment, travel. There is a section for participant training support. This is really for K awards, like an internal, like this award here, we've given money to each of you. We've given money for training and or coursework. So it's not usual for most of your R1s you're going to apply for, or R21s, but it's particularly around Ks. And then other direct costs. And those other direct costs are going to be other things that you do. For example, you want to make sure that you put in any materials and supplies. We're going to talk about that. Publication costs, which are really important now because almost every time that you put in that, and I know you know this because we talked about it, that you put in that it's part of the K or that is part of your some NIH funded system, that they want it open labeled, and an open means almost $4,000 per journal. So when you're writing in a grant and you're putting in stuff, you should put a lot of money. We didn't never used to put much in there, but now we really need to put a lot in there. And a large grant, it wouldn't be unusual to put $50,000 in there or more. So you make sure that you think about all those things, and we'll go through this. And there might be a few different forms for each thing, but the first thing we're going to do is create an internal budget. And this is what is so cool about it. And this is really Patty, so I'm sharing it with you. And it's to create these spreadsheets in Excel. And through those spreadsheets, you're going to be able to pull from them and create a timeline, a budget, subcontracts and other components, make sure that all the efforts line up and the total amounts for the grant are appropriate for what you are applying for. And it will be that spreadsheet which will populate those items that you need to do to get to the common form. So this is kind of an example, and we're going to go through it. This is an example of a, project that I'm going to get rid of your pictures because then I can't see here. Is an example of a project where it's we have two sites that are working with you. It's 2 years long, and we got to figure out you want like 72 patients. You've decided that your sample size is like 72. So, and you look at those large red numbers, that correlates with those numbers on the left-hand side when it says, how do I figure out my sample size, my number expected per month once I do that? What is my cumulative number enrolled by month? And what are the follow-up periods and study phase so that I can figure out how much money I need for all of this to occur? So, four, as you can see, there are your study phases. So, you're going to start up. So, for example, I'm starting something up, and Yale would be the primary site. And so I'm going to start right away, but it's going to take me 6 months to get everything organized, right? So I got to get my team at Yale ready. I have to make sure that I'm doing my protocols and IRB applications, getting my CRFs all in line, ready to go before I actually start recruitment. So you can see in there what months are there, and then you can see when you start in recruitment. And so this helps populate the amount. So for example, you started and you said, okay, I got 72 people and I'm starting on month 7. That's October of 26. I'm going to enroll 6 people now. That's my cumulative amount at baseline. And then the next month in November, I'm enrolling 6 more. So that's 12 people. And that I have 6 to baseline, I have 6 at 30-day. And the next you can see then I have 6 more I enroll. I have 18. So now I have 3 different columns that would populate that 18. And if you go down to the bottom, which I got to get rid of your pictures here, you can see, if you go down by the bottom here, then it'll tell you that'll all add up to 72. Does that make sense? All right. So now when you go along per subject expenses, this is all populated. So you're seeing the same form that you saw on the last slide. So again, you see I start in October with my 6 people at baseline and then the next month. And then that you can see my first month, I have $600 that I'm going to spend at baseline because I'm going to give each of those people $100 in say incentive, right? And then say, okay, at 30 days, I'm giving them $30. So now I have 600 at baseline because I put a 600 more in the next month. And then I have to have $180 for that follow-up calls. And then that populates all the way down to the end of getting all 72 people. And it will tell you how much money I need at each particular time so that you can insert that yearly amount into that main document that the government wants. So it kind of links all these expenses. And you do this for everything. If you have phones that you're going to give out, medications, how much the medicines that will cost, everything. And you populate it all out so that you'll know in the end how much you want. And it really actually gives you, as you see in the bottom, this timeline. Can you see that? Because now I can't see it because you're in my road. So it shows you here, startup, recruitment, follow-up, closeout, and then data analysis and publications. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. I can't see you now with all this. All right, now let's go on. I don't know why it's not moving, but okay. So now we have the lead site internal budget worksheet. And this is pretty easy to fill out the first part of it. The first part is the Yale part, and the next part, and then we're going to talk about the sites that are going to be your sub sites. But this will be an example. So these names are all made up and their salaries are all made up. So whatever. So you have your PI, your co-Is, and maybe your statistician is a co-I, or all of your senior personnel. And then the salary cap is there, or they could have a lower salary cap, the calendar months that they're going to be working, the level of effort that you're going to apply. And when you do this and you set this up for yourself, you can change this. So unfortunately, what happens is you have so much money for each grant And there are costs of which you just can't fool around with. You have costs that are going to be your largest cost is going to be your research associates. You can't do the project without them. They're going to be a really major cost, and depending on where you are, they can be a really high level. So that's a cost you have to do. If you have a certain amount of patients and you have a certain amount of urine testing, or you have lab work that you need, or you have different compensations, incentives you're giving out, those are things that you have to have. So you have to populate that. So unfortunately, it's the senior personnel that keeps whittling away and away until finally we're there to nothing, because remember that almost in these R1s for 500 direct costs are the same as it was 30 years ago when I put in R1. It hasn't really changed. They say you can go up higher with request, but often that's not approved. And so everybody's amounts of salaries have gone up. And so unfortunately, you end up playing around with this quite a bit, because in this case, we have a bunch of RAs that we really need, although this is a lot of money. So we have a bunch of RAs we want. So we've put those in. And then you can see over on the right-hand side, what I'm going to need for year one, what I'm going to need for year two and year three. And then I get my direct cost, because three will help populate all that, because in that other spreadsheet, that populated everything you needed for incentives, subjects, etc. And then anything else that you need here, like in this case, we just put, how much per article. And I think we put in $16,000 a year. So $32,000 total. We wanted some urine test kits. So those are in there. Incentives, specific labs that we needed that were not clinical, that we would have to actually come up with on our own. Any consultants that we have, anything else, any IRB costs that you need, whether it's in your institution or whether it's a central IRB, which costs, by the way, quite a bit, close to like 10 grand a site. So that all has to be put in there. Then you come out with how much you need. What are those direct costs? This is a larger grant, like a UH3. So you're going to see it's a lot more money. And then what your indirect is. And you have to actually make sure that you put your subs in there too. And I think we have that on the next one, right, Patty? So this goes on for year one and year two. And this is kind of like internal at your site. And then this one is the sub site. So this is for each sub. We have two subs in this particular example. So in this case, we have one of them, and you see the PI and the co-Is and the RAs that they're going to need, and any travel or anything else. And some of this stuff can be put in the main in your own budget. If you're going to send like lab tests or urine tests, you might be taking most of it and not leaving that up to the site and putting it in the main site, and it could just be in all your budget. But in their case, they still have to have incentives. They need to have labs done there, and they most likely, if you had an investigational pharmacy or somewhere, if you're sending medications, that has to be taken into account. And then you have their direct rate and their indirect rate. And so you just have to make sure that your pre-award people are speaking very carefully with those external sources, so that you make sure that you know what is their federally negotiated rate, all right, and that is all in here. And so you'll come up with this document, and then this document has to feed back into the main document, so that this is more money added on. Does that make sense? I can barely see you now. Any questions so far? No? Okay. All right. Um, I have some notes, so I just want to make sure I'm saying them. Um, for these sites, and I just want to go over some other things when you have sites that are really important, is that you have to make sure that there's internal equity across those sites, so that you don't allow the site to make up the budget. You will make up the budget for them, and you may ask them different questions about, what their rates are and stuff, but you make up the budget. And so you want to be sure you're doing that you've made up a scope of work, like what they're going to be responsible for, what all this budgeting is, And then what they need to know is that, yes, this is an allotment for them on year one, but it doesn't mean that they can spend all this money on year one. So in real life, what happens is that nothing ever goes on time. Like anything that can happen will happen. And so you'll have to roll with it. And that may be, okay, the IRB didn't come back in time, or I don't know, something happened and we had to wait. We couldn't get the right urine test we need, blah, blah, blah. They couldn't hire the person, or they did hire a person and they left. They had to hire another person. Something will happen. And so, in fact, that first year never really gets to be the first year. So, you have to be very careful that you tell them that you just use what you use. So they're not going to charge you 12 months of an RA that wasn't there 12 months, or 6 months if they were only there 4 months, they charge you 4 months. And all of that leftover money then comes back, and you're hoping therefore that you can get a carryover, because if it's a 2-year grant, most likely it'll last 3 years. And so you'll have enough money for it to carry forward. And so you have to be really careful that that unallocated balance um, needs to be left alone and will probably roll forward, but you're the one who does that. This is also an internal worksheet which helps you understand that you have all the efforts correct and the internal calendar months and the efforts, and that's all will roll over again into your main document. And also, it helps you write your budget justification, because you can't have really weird variations in people's efforts. But trust me, they will always have variations because of the way the money flows. In the beginning of the project, because you're not enrolling patients or you're getting started, you may need more PI or COI time to get the study going. But you don't need so many RAs perhaps in the first year. Here we did put them in every year, but maybe you don't need them for 6 months, and then you put them in. And that's, you can easily justify this. So maybe I have them a lot, then maybe I reduce them in another month because they don't need to be there so much. Occasionally, what probably is that third person, James Corse, whoever he is probably the statistician, so that you need like very beginning and early to get going. But I don't need him so much until at that last year. I need to pay him a lot because he's going to do all of my stats. And that often, and I'm going to caution you about statisticians, because statisticians are needed always in the beginning to help you with your sample size, and really are very integral into the to developing the project. But you don't use them much towards the, if it's a really large grant, you might use them because you want to make sure everything is copacetic. If you have a DSMB or meeting or whatever, I want to make sure that everything is going. Are they looking at to see that all the forms are filled out? Are there missing data? Blah, blah, blah. But they don't have a lot of work to do. They have a ton of work to do at the end, because they're the ones who are going to be working with the data, helping you write the paper, present it. And often that happens after the funding is over. So I would always have a really good conversation with your statistician to say, I'm funding you, but you need to keep some of this money. Just remember that this money, if you're not really using it, we're just going to carry it over because you're going to need it in this whole third year, once or whatever that year is after everybody has been enrolled, because that's when you need them the most. And you just have this understanding that they're going to help with the papers, et cetera. And they're on the papers, of course, but that unfortunately, that really hard stuff at the end is not necessarily funded. So you make sure that this internal worksheet is fine, that everything is addressed, and you have a reason why you're justifying people to be more on one year and not on the other, etc. So this is then allows you to see the overall budget from the whole beginning for with all the science, and it ensures that you stay within those limits. So this is what will be populated out. So you can see in your first budget period, which is the first year, you have the Yale site, the total cost plus the direct. You have the sub site, which is the total cost and the directs, and then you have the total direct and indirect. And then we always make a column for what did the RFA say, or whatever the grant is say. It allowed me to use 3 million total direct and indirect, and that's where I am right now. I have some left over. I could put more in. second year, again, this is what I have, this is what I have left over. And finally, everything and all of the subs and everything are all added in there and everything. And she can make sure that you're there. We often write notes to ourselves, as you can see here, so that you can see I have 2 years, I'm starting this, I have 72 sites, I have in-person recruitment, this is how much I need, and then follow-up clinics, how much compensation. These are just notes for yourself, so to make sure everything is flowing perfectly. This doesn't usually work out this way, that you have so much money left over. So this is not usually the case. Usual cases I have it the reverse, right? That I have not enough money, and this is all I have. So now I have to go back and work it out and say, okay, I got to take less for what can I take less for? What do I think I might be able to carry over when I need it later? And go back and keep reworking it until the numbers come out. It's easy to go back and play with little bits of money, and those little bits of money that you have left over always go into things like the publication costs or the travel costs. You can put more money in for travel. Um, where are you going to disseminate this information? How many people at each site will your site PIs be going? Will your at the contracted site, are they going to be going, et cetera? That's kind of money you can throw in there because you don't want to leave anything on the table.
It
Um,
looks
Yeah,
like we have,
okay,
I was just gonna harp a little bit on what I think is a really important pragmatic point that you made about the statistician, because it also applies to radiologists. It also it applies to your RA, as you alluded to. And so a lot of if you're doing a clinical study, a lot of your budget is dependent on recruitment. And so once your recruitment starts lagging, but you have committed to paying somebody 100% effort or whatever it is, you're now paying, but they're not doing any of the work.
work, right.
And so at the end of your award, you're going to run out of money to actually be able to do the work that you want to do. And so if somebody's reading films for you, don't start paying them until they're films to read. If somebody's, if somebody's, right? So if somebody's doing analysis for you, don't start paying them until there's something to analyze. And so I think that's a really, really important pragmatic point. And then Alicia has a hand up also.
Go ahead.
I was curious. I know that there's a lot of things that change, as you alluded to, like the way that things never work out the way that you hope.
Right.
How much wiggle room is there after this has been submitted? Like, how much can things change when the situation changes?
You have a fair amount of wiggle room, okay, as long as you think you're going to get this, you're going to be able to complete the project. They're your project officer generally that you should be very well aware of and constantly talking with, is knowledgeable that things never go the way that you think they're going to go, right? So if there's little things that can change and you can reallocate. If you're going to change a whole project, that's a different thing. Like you say, I'm never going to get to 72 people. That could be a big deal, right? So the whole project is based off of the sample size that you may be able to find significance if it exists at such and such a sample. And now you're going to say, well, I'm only going to get to 50, then maybe things are not going to be significant because you don't have enough sample size, not because of the intervention, for example. Other ways, large trials, they have DSMBs who review how things are going early on in the trials and halfway done. And maybe they'll find that, oh my God, something is really better one versus another. And they may stop a trial because it is, oh, you've already shown the answer not to go on. So it depends on what you want to change. Oh, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's good to know that you're not like locked in and that you can't move a single dollar.
No, you can move within this group. Let me explain that, and Patty will tell you. You can move anything within the groups. All right. So, say for example, you have in that other cost, I have a whole bunch of incentive, and then I have a bunch for publications, and I have a bunch for travel. You can move that. You can change that. They don't really care. That's other costs. In terms of the PI and co-Is, there are rules about that. And correct me if I'm wrong, Patty, but it's like 25%, right? Is it 25%?
You can increase someone's effort, but you cannot reduce it.
Right. more than 25%.
Right.
So, that seems like, oh, that's not so bad. But when they're on a small amount, that's a big deal. So, you just have to be sure. If you do it, reduce it more than 25%, you have to go to the project officer and you have to submit some documents and ask for their permission to do that. You can always increase it, but you can't take something away and say, oh, I'm dumping this guy. You could, but you have to go through your project officer to say, we realized we really didn't need this position. We're going to reallocate the funds, and they have to okay that. But it's in each category that they're looking for those main categories, right? If you want to use two RAs instead of three, okay, right? No one's gonna be upset about that. Did I answer your question, Alicia?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. So
Hey,
this was
Gail,
our.
sorry, a
Go
question
ahead.
just came in the chat. Since the NIH changed the rule where you don't need pre-approval for annual costs over the 500K direct, do you have a rule of thumb for how you think about structuring your budget, or are reviewers critical of budgets over a certain amount?
They say that, but that's not really true. So what you should do is talk to the project officer for each of those grants and ask them very specifically. Because the project officer will let you know. I doubt they might say, like, I doubt anything's going to go through with that because we don't have that much money. Like, this is how much money they have set aside for that particular RFA or that particular thing. So they might do it, they may not. Like NHLBI really never let you put in extra ever. Were always a pain in the neck. Some other people I have gotten an okay to put in a little extra over the years, but I would be very hesitant to do too much without really talking to the project officer. And even though you don't have to have an official okay, they will tell you whether they think it'll go or it'll fly or not. They can always choose not to fund that. Like they can say, the people who are reviewing the grants are really not supposed to have anything to do with the money. They may make a recommendation. They may say, I think this is a lot, but really it has nothing to do with them, right? But then the agency can say, I, I'm not going to fund this. It's too much, right? And maybe that's one of the reasons that they're not going to do it because it's really up to their discretion. So I would never, it's usually 500. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to put in for 1 million. Like, really? That's not going to go. I don't know if you ever, Bay, did you ever recently put something in for a lot more money?
No, I mean, Cliff can speak to this too, but I think this is really an NIH thing, Regina, to get to your points. And Gail said it, but the budget is not score driving. So reviewers can say, we're not really sure what they're doing with this money that they're asking for, but that's after final scores have been entered in terms of the NIH review process. And then at the level of the basically the institute is where the question of, your budget comes into play. So you really want to be clear on that before you go in talking to your program officer.
And they go through the budget justification line by line. You say you're spending $100,000 on this item and your justification is kind of poorly worded, and we question that. So we're thinking of cutting that out of your budget, after they've decided to fund the project. So yeah, you want to be good and have a good explanation for where the money's going.
Right. And I used to try to be really a good citizen and be very, very close to where exactly what I needed. And I found that was the wrong way to do it because they will always cut you some. It doesn't matter what, they're always going to cut you some. So you should have to have a little bit of fluff in there. I don't care what it is, if it's travel, if it's, publications, if it's whatever, because something is going to go wrong. And things just happen. Like you want an RA is available, and this is the one that's available, and she or he is a little bit more than what I had budgeted for, and you really want that person, or there's some other HR thing that goes on in your institution which says, oh, all RAs are going to get, a 5% raise next year. And you're like, what? I don't have 5% to give them. You can't go back and then say to the NIH, I need more. right? Or their fringe rate may change. Like our fringe rate just changed it high, not our fringe rate, our IDC rate, our fringe rate changed. I can go back and say, I want to fix this. So it's stuck the way it is. And when they fund it, by the way, it's stuck the way it is. So, like, say the PI or the COI, you have it up to the cap, which is whatever it is now, 200 something, 20 something, and you fund it that way. You're not allowed to say, oh, I think it's going to go up because no one knows really whether it will or not. And you're funded that same way the whole way through. So if that rate goes up and your university says, oh, well, you have to give that person now instead of 228, you have to give them 230. So that's two more thousand for each person. You can't go back to them and say, I need two more thousand for each. They're going to say, I'm not giving you any more money. So what happens is that their effort drops, right? To meet that number because you have to meet that number. So it's a matter of always adding a little bit of buffer somewhere in here. Don't try to be as cheap as you can because I've done that and made a mistake. You need to like obviously be reasonable, but don't try to make it the least as it is, right? You got to like have something in here because you're sure that things are not going to go the way you want them to. And if someone's not doing the work, that's when you really have to hit on your subs and say, look, I can't pay for this. So you have to, I don't know who's paying for your RA, but it can't be me because you're not doing anything, right? We're going to put it on hold for a minute here. And why are you not doing this now? What is going on over there? You're supposed to be starting enrolling. If it just is a little bit of a time, it's okay. But if it were a big time, it's the whole thing that happens, even when people go out on leave, you're really not supposed to say anything like that. Someone goes out on leave, you have to pay them. All right. They go on whatever leave it is, whether it's a child leave or it's a sickness or someone in their family. I mean, it's very legitimate, but you have to pay for that. The government's not going to say, oh, by the way, I know you had a couple of people on medical leave. I'm going to give you a few extra, not a few, a lot of extra thousand. No way. You have to come up with it. So that's why hopefully there are more people in your department and there are more people who have grants and you sort of cover each other when you need to and you think of all different things, but you cannot believe how that can really disrail your budget when someone is out for 3 months and you're like, how am I going to pay 3 months worth of somebody? So you got to look around and see, and it almost always comes out of the PI or the co-Is because there's no other where to go. Okay, so this, I want to make sure we get through it, then we can have it. So now this is your budget justification, and this here is just examples from the red being the lead site and then the yellow being the sub site. So you're actually going to say exactly what each of these people do. We have examples of this, by the way, we can always share with you of what like a PI would do, what a co-I does, what the RAs, what everybody does during this award, and what each of these monies are coming from and why you need them. And again, you need to be very involved in your subs too to make sure that that is exactly right. And that theirs looks, congruent amongst the different subs that you might have, that everybody has exactly the same amounts, unless you've, for some reason, allocated more to one site than another. And that again, they know right up front that you're paying them for what they are doing. And they have to be very careful. And they're not somebody is like looking at this in an analytical budget place in your university and say, oh, they're supposed to have gotten $250,000 that year. I'm just going to charge out 250. You can't do that. You can only charge for what you've done. Okay. And then this is just a little bit about just in time. So if you're lucky enough for them to think about funding your project, the government will ask you some requests. And usually this is a fairly quick turnaround time so that you should be prepared that you know how to do other supports for each of the key personnel and that you have verification of human subject training. And this is really, really quick turnaround. So you should make sure that if you have a good score, that you're working on this fairly soon, even if they haven't asked you for it yet. And then, of course, there's always post-award management. Usually that's like us as a whole separate team of post-award people, then the pre-award who actually got the award. But now you're working with people and you really have to make sure that all these costs are correct. And one of the things we always get into trouble with, I do with being in the NIDA node, and I'm responsible for like 50 different places and subs, is that there's amount of time when a year will end and you have to have all of your monies in and all of your receipts in. And I think what, you got 90 days, Patty? Like 90 days to do that. And you keep reminding them you have 90 days to give me that receipt because I have to get it all in with my end of the year and my progress report, etc. And some people, if they don't do it, they won't get their money. So it's a real big problem. So you have to just keep on people to make sure they get all this to you so you know when it is. When the annual report, it takes a long time to do these. It can't be done in a week or in a day, not because you can't do it. It's because it involves so many people in your organization who have to approve everything and then they send it to the NIH. So you really have to work on it long before it's due and make sure that it's right and harass everybody to get those receipts in or they're not going to be paid and make sure you're working closely with your post-award people. I'm telling you, there have been nightmares about this at Yale. I happen to have a great one that I trust enormously with my life, but there are many who aren't, and they just kind of go, "Oh, I'm on vacation next week. Oh, I didn't tell you that? Well, too bad." So you just really want to make sure you know this early on and when it's due. And again, remember that the use of unobligated bonds is not automatic. Most grants will not even let you do that. They're going to say, you got to ask me for it, and we'll see if we'll give it to you. Most always they will, but you have to ask for it. And you can't ask for it as a carryover until all of your progress report is in and all of that is okayed. So what normally happens then is you know you have money for the next year, but I can't use all that money for the next year because I haven't gotten agreed to get that carryover. So then you may be at risk for a certain amount that happens, and you may have to set up some at-risk accounts. But in general, they're good for it, but your institution has to kind of be experienced enough to know that. Some external ones, if you use, I remember when I first started working with Alameda and Andrew Herring, that's a regular hospital, even though they do a ton of research in there. They don't have research people. So that I sent him a note, an at-risk account. I said, Yale is Yale is affirming that we will send you this money. It's not here now, but we are on the line for it. You're going to get it. And the CEO dragged him up there and said, "What do you think? I'm crazy? I'm not listening to this person." And really was a big fit, thought he was committing fraud and all this stuff. And he goes, "No, no, this is how the NIH works. Yale sent us a letter. They will give us the money. They promise the money is coming. It's just not here right now. It will be." But they were like all bent out of shape over it. So you have to be careful, depending on what kind of subs you're working with. Okay, Patty, did I forget anything?
I don't think you did.
Okay, we have other questions. The other thing that we have is Patty was going to show you how this actually works, like how this Excel spreadsheet actually populates all this if you feel like you want to see it. Seem okay? All right, let's try it, Patty.
Okay.
I'm going to unshare mine.
Okay.
You guys really have no questions?
I can't believe that I have any questions. I have questions all the time. But usually you have to do it yourself. But I really got you to explain how this works because it's phenomenal. And you have to figure out how to do this because our pre-award people don't do it like this. They're expecting that we're going to give them all the numbers and you have to kind of come up with those numbers. And if you're wrong, it's a big deal.
Okay, I'm assuming you can see a spreadsheet on
Not yet. Not
Okay.
yet. There it is. Okay.
Okay, great. So all of these different worksheets all are part of one spreadsheet, and all of the different ones that you've seen on each slide representing a worksheet that is dynamic. So you can input information into it and then it pulls in. We started the conversation today with a timeline. So I think, can you see that timeline now? I'll share a new screen. I don't know if it doesn't change in between, it should. But this is the timeline that you saw on a slide. Can everybody see this?
I can see it, Patty. You might zoom in a little bit
I'll try to make it
if
bigger.
possible.
So
Okay,
this again
good.
is the 2-year study example, and it shows all the information Gail talked about before about when you expect people to do what and what are the costs associated with it. So for example, compensation is $100 at baseline. That's a formula. When you click on the cell, you can see it's I-10, which is this number here, times the 100. And that's how we come up with the cost for compensation at baseline in month 1 of recruitment. As Gail mentioned, in the next month, we're going to be working with 12 people. We'll enroll 6 more people. So that is another formula. It comes from the cell next to it. And then for the 30 days, it's another formula. So it's the number of people we expect at 30 days times 30. If you were going to be doing labs, you jump over to this column. We anticipate $1,000 per person for labs. We're going to be doing it at baseline in 30 days. That's again a formula. So it's the I-10 category, cell rather, times 1,000. The yearly totals that she was talking about that go into the main budget are here. So it's basically, there's 2 sites. This is the total cost for this time period. You can see it's all blocked out. And then it's divided by 2 sites because each site is going to be paying incentives. Same thing applies for the labs, a whole area. And that's how that works. So the timeline, as long as it makes sense to you scientifically, should help you populate your budget. There's another worksheet called Yale Site. We can send you this example. The Yale Site budget has a lot more expenses than just the operation of like recruitment. So it talks about things like PCs and iPads if you need that for recruiting. That doesn't come from the timeline, but something that would is this incentive right here. So you can see it's a formula. I'm sorry, I'll make this bigger.
Make it bigger, yeah.
Sorry. Let me make it bigger. Why is it not making it bigger? I don't know why it's not making it bigger. I'm going to share again. And if something doesn't make sense in this call, we can always meet one-on-one and I can review it with you. I don't know why it's not making it
That's
bigger.
all right. Go ahead.
But it's a formula. So the cost for subject incentives is right here. And that's taking it from the worksheet on the other page and putting it into here. So it's actually pulling from the timeline and putting it into here. The same thing works that way for the subsite. If you can see the new share with the subsite, I'll share it again just in case. The subsite has the same kind of expenses, like what would be the incentives or what would be the lab expenses that comes from a different worksheet and it goes into here. The the graphic timeline, or the totals rather, is probably the next one. That takes also the information from the other worksheets. Like this is a formula that comes from the other worksheet that pulls it into here, so you don't have to type it in again. And then the totals are just obviously the way Excel works. It combines things together and gives you a total. But the point is that it comes from these different worksheets. The worksheets all work together and it makes it as accurate as you can possibly get it. The all effort worksheet, which is this one here, is something that shows the the flow of people, but that also is information that comes from the other worksheet. So it pulls out how much you're paying your PI at Yale by effort. It calculates a calendar month, and that's that. The graphic timeline is the only thing that doesn't really pull from the worksheets. This is something that you create yourself, but it is explained by the timeline. So if you look at the timeline, you would be able to know you had 6 months of startup, then you were going to do a 12-month recruitment, and then you were going to have 4 months of follow-up and your data analysis. I think that's it for me.
Great.
I saw that Cliff put a comment in the chat, so I just wanted to read that to draw attention to it. So, things to make sure you're thinking about that might not be obvious are including fringe benefits for all your personnel. And for some institutions, that's going to be different for staff versus faculty. And it might change from year to year. Computers may or may not be allowed, depending on whether or not they're considered facilities. And then the F&A, facilities and administration, or your indirect cost, that rate varies based on institution. It's federally negotiated. And so that changes based on, your institution versus if you have a subcontract. And then Opwe mentioned reiterating that salaries and prices go up, and you're often stuck with a fixed budget. So you need to talk with your department leadership to make sure you can successfully complete what you're saying you will complete. So Cliff or Opwe, feel free to comment more on this.
I would also add that once you get funding, there are lots of fees that you didn't know about. The IRB will have a fee, the pharmacy will have a fee, your lab core will have a fee. You kind of are protected from that when you're in training or don't have any money, but as soon as you have money, everybody wants a piece. So your
Exactly.
budget needs to have that built in.
Especially your research pharmacy, where you think it can't possibly cost that much, right? Like I'll go down and do it myself. And originally, at my first trial at
Yeah,
Boston City, I did it myself. I went into the pharmacy and I made the little placebos and whatever. Like that doesn't happen anymore, and they charge an enormous amount of money for it.
There's our dispense fee for no matter what you're dispensing is $50. So I think we gave 2 milligram of lorazepam to people, and it came in a little bottle, and it was just the blister tab, like in that bottle, right? So clearly it was just, but it's $50, right? It's like
Ridiculous.
it's 30 cents worth of drug, but it's a $50 dispense fee.
Yeah, so get that set up. Sometimes they will be helpful. Sometimes you have a CTSA that may add in some. I feel like our CTSA just makes us pay more than, why do we bother having one? But and again, if I'm working with another hospital, like Alameda doesn't charge me anything for their pharmacy. They just send it, we'll be fine. Like, yeah, we'll spend thousands and tens of thousands of dollars for me to keep it somewhere. So those are things you have to work out really carefully when you're doing the budgets early on. And these things are just not a lot of money and they're very hard. Um, so you need help. You can't do this alone. You need help and you need a couple of set of eyes on it so you don't make any mistakes. And you have to keep looking at it and looking at it to make sure. And as I say, give yourself some wiggle room in there. Don't say, oh, I don't really need 30%. If you had money left over, put yourself in for 30% because you're not going to have it by the end. Believe me, you're going to have to use that money for something else. Or, in that other category, you can fit a fair amount, oh, you need to have iPads. Those iPads may get lost during the course of a 3 or 5 year study. So you have to make sure that you have extra iPads in there, right? Just in case. Like who's going to pay for that iPad? Just add it in. You don't have to spend it. It can be there and you could not use it and use it for something else later.
Agreed. Another thing I learned in the past 6 months is that the budget justification is now one of those parts of the grant that is getting scrutinized for words that may or may not be consistent with NIH's priorities. And it's easy to put things in the budget justification that get flagged, and then it creates a back and forth to clean it up before the money will flow. Uh,
Right. And it can take forever.
and it's innocent things, that are just like a waste of time. Like, the person is going to take care of a diverse set of responsibilities. The word diverse will get
First got picked up, right?
and now we have to change the budget justification to, get it to fly through. That's not at NIH, that's at, the financial review at OMB or something after, but that is now something we have to think about. So sometimes less is more, just the facts, no flowery language.
And for Gail and Cliff, I don't know, just sort of beyond cutting the budget, there's also the issuance of the award. And Regina, I'm thinking of you, especially from a U award point of view, right? Whereby you may get your first year, but depending on progress,
Right. You may not get the other.
year two may not be
Right.
until year three. In the larger scheme of conscientiousness with, tax dollars, it's not unreasonable, but it's just something that, again, as you are supposedly 20% effort, you're still doing what you're doing for that fiscal year, but you may not actually have, all the monies that you need. And so I don't know if Gail or Cliff have had experience with that. Seems like it.
Uh, yes. I mean, there's a lot of mess that can happen, and that's when you're working with your chair and your research, vice chair of research or whatever is helpful to you. Like what kinds of monies are available to sustain certain things moving forward, right? And it's not like they pay you. It's just that they don't increase your allotment of what you work clinically, right? So you wanted it, okay, like, okay, I'm missing this year is a mess, something's happening, but I'll get it next year. So, but I still have to do a bunch of work. So I need that assurance that I still have that protected time. And I think, it gets harder and harder the more research you have in the age in the department, the more people are cognizant of this, but the less you have, the less they might not be, but also they might have more available cash because they're not taking care of a lot of researchers. But it's something you just have to keep checking on. And make your chair aware of it if there's going to be a problem. If you foresee a problem coming up, make sure that he or she is aware of it early on so that they can deal with that mess. But if it's something can happen, it will happen because it always has. We've had like just about everything that could happen. You start something and it's COVID, right? And like, oh my God, now what? Or like I said, we're about to start and your RA tells you that they're going out on leave and you go, oh my God, we just did all the training. Now what am I going to do? Well, you're going to figure it out. You're going to get somebody else. Sometimes your universities have extra people on hand for things like that can come in for brief periods of time and they don't charge you like a ton um, for that service. Sometimes there'll be other RAs in the department that might be able to pick up the slack. Sometimes you'll be picking up the slack.
Yeah, and I think if you just the point Gail made about making sure your chair is involved, I think if you have a research sort of savvy and experienced chair, they at least will not be surprised by any of this. And I just kind of took a quick look at the list there, but we have varying sort of research experience level for all the awardees on the call. And so the more you communicate and the more frequently you communicate with your chair, the less of a shock it is when you say, oh, yes, I still have the award. They just didn't issue it this year. It's like, what? Huh? And so,
Right. And you could make you always need to be savvy about stuff like what's going on in your department. So each different university applies indirects to departments differently. Some may never see it, some may give all of it. You know, ours doesn't give a lot, but it gives 9% of the indirects to the department, right? So you can figure out how much you've given to the department. In general, you don't have access to that. It goes into a pool because things happen for everybody. But at least you'll know I've contributed. Wow, that first year, you look at that indirect rate that they got $600,000. So you got, 9% of that, right? So you got whatever that is, $50,000 or so. So can I have some of that? Or can I just so you know, I'm just going to stay the way I am right now. Can we just not, make me do more work? Or, can you help me support something else? Because that money did come into the department. Departments need that money though, because they often have people that are helping you, right? They might have some pre-award people that are helping out or, doing